Good day, Black Knight scholars. Mr. Deegan in the Deegan room. At the Deegan desk, it is time for 10-2, the Cold War. Let's write down our learning target. I will understand the origins, beginnings, the start of the Cold War. You see the United States versus the Soviet Union. Summary part 1. The Cold War set the framework for global politics for 45 years after the end of the World War II. It also influenced U.S. domestic politics, politics at home, the conduct of foreign affairs, and the role of the government in the U.S. economy after 1945. When was the Cold War? The Cold War lasted from the end of World War II in 1945, remember August 1945 and those 2 atomic bombs, until the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989. The US versus the USSR. The US and the Soviet Union represented different political and economic values. The US represented democratic political ideas and a free market capitalism economic system. And the Soviet Union was a totalitarian government with a communist economic system. And communism, the government controls the economy, the media, the schools, every part of society. Capitalism lets businesses make profits and people choose their own way. The Truman Doctrine. President Harry Truman's Truman Doctrine supported the containment of communism. This was a guiding principle of U.S. foreign policy throughout the Cold War. According to the doctrine, communist countries were more aggressive. And the Truman Doctrine was announced by this president on March 12th, 1947, in a speech that we just talked about in class. NATO. All of the NATO countries are in blue here. There's the US, there's Western Europe. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO for short, was formed in 1949 as a defensive alliance among the US and Western European countries. Why? To prevent a Soviet invasion of Western Europe. There was a real fear that the Soviet Union and its communism ideas were going to spread to Western Europe like a disease. On the other side of the coin, we have the Warsaw Pact. Allies of the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe formed the Warsaw Pact in 1955. And these are all of the countries, there's Soviet Union and its allies, who were in this pact. For about 50 years, both Warsaw countries and NATO countries had large military forces, facing each other in Europe. So there were 2 sides, nuclear weapons pointed at each other. China goes communist. The communists' takeover in China after World War II increased U.S. fears of communist domination of the world. You have the Soviet Union as communist, China as communist. 2 of the largest countries in the world are both communist. Communism leads to dictators, not good. However, China and the Soviet Union became rivals, not allies, competing for land and political power in the Asian region. And there's Mao Zedong, the leader of communist China, who was a dictator and controlled the minds of the Chinese people for more than 40 years. Nixon exploits the rivalry. U.S. President Richard Nixon exploited or took advantage of the rivalry between the Soviet Union and China. Nixon himself visited China in 1972, and there he is with his wife right in front of the Chinese wall, the wall of China, to show his support for the country. Threat of nukes After the Soviet Union tested its first atomic bomb in 1949, the US and the USSR felt the threat of a nuclear war. During the Cold War, US President Dwight Eisenhower, there he is, 34th president, planner of D-Day in World War II, adopted a policy called massive retaliation to deter or stop any nuclear strike by the Soviets. And that is our start of the Cold War. Please think of 2 questions you have. Write them down in your vid notes. Don't forget the Canvas quiz, the 10-2 quiz, which lives on Canvas. And when you're done with these notes and the quiz, you are done with 10-2. This is Mr. Deegan signing off.